before we okay, there we go. All right, I think we're on.
Yes, that's fine.
Okay,
Yeah.
good.
By the way, just remember that these conversations are mostly for us as well. So I think people would be happy to hear our conversations and
Oh
are
yeah.
going off in a tangent. So feel free to say anything.
Well, we have to. I mean, we've
Um,
been away a couple of weeks. Wi-Fi issues are fixed. Apparently, it was with everything looks good. For
yes,
those who don't know, we are coordinating this from opposite sides of the world, so it can be a little bit tricky sometimes
I
linking
think
up.
you've kept up with us long enough. They know that already. But yeah,
So we have to, of
see,
course, do the intro. We have to do the intro.
friendships and collaborators and the film industry has no borders. Cinema
That's
has no borders.
oh, that's a good one. We should call that the title of one of these things.
I mean, I'm only
Cinema.
saying it to defend co-producing, which is what people are attempting to do. Um, US and China trying to make films together,
Mhm.
and
Oh, it's absolutely
yeah,
is. It's so far beyond the just California anymore. I mean,
yeah,
film is an international phenomenon. I mean, there's so much talent, even just where I live, that that works because they love it, not because they make a lot of money or they want to improve their trade. It's everywhere. It's Europe. It's here. It's everywhere. And if California doesn't step up with these tax breaks and try to incentivize keeping productions in California, which I think a lot of them are trying to do now because they see the threat, it's all going to go elsewhere. If it's wrong to be able to send a whole film crew to Ireland for less money than being able to film on the Paramount lot in LA, and that's the
yeah,
reality of it now. Um, but let's do our intro because we've been away
yeah.
for a couple of weeks. So and now the Whiskey and Cigarettes podcast with your hosts Tina Kilberg and Tim Chessman, sponsored by. That's your line.
Tanya Tanning Butter.
Tareyton Fine Cigarettes, and of course, 96 MFK, Hit Radio Los Angeles,
More music, more groove, less talk.
just like
I'm
the
not really
coffee
in it
mug
today.
says. That is correct.
Cool.
Limited
My
series
mind
one-up.
was off.
Oh,
I'm still stuck at the conversation that we had on tariffs. What's your view on the recent proposal to impose an 100% tariff on foreign produced films?
well,
Because it sparked a significant debate within the past week in the film industry. And this actually encourages domestic production. So I don't know why it's a bad thing.
I don't
I
think
don't
it
know
is.
what your views are.
I don't know how practically how feasible that is to enact that and actually put it into practice. On some level, I mean, I don't want to get political because politics is so tribal here in the United States. It's ridiculous. It's just absurd, and I don't want to go down that hole because I don't endorse any politicians. Like a good friend told me one time, believing in politicians is like believing the strippers really like us. So take that for what it's worth. But if it's meant to incentivize domestic production, that's fine. But I think the part that people miss, and this could be a whole conversation in and of itself, and I don't want to come across like some expert because I'm not, but just what I'm seeing on the ground here in the States, in Colorado, there is a
Mhm.
lot of film talent here. There are a lot of small independent productions that happen here. There's a lot of talent across the board here, from actors to directors to screenwriters to crew people to costumers, makeup artists. There's a lot of that here, but it's not in the mainstream. It's not. We're not working with multi-million-dollar budgets, so it gets overlooked, like a lot of other places in the world and in the United States in particular. So is it bad to incentivize producing in the United States? No, but there is a lot of production that's going on here. I think what they're talking about is it's not happening as much in California. Production in California and in the LA area in particular is down something like 20 to
Mhm.
30% from previous years, which is alarming.
It
This
is down. And it's because I think it's because of the fact that California has just shifted priorities to big tech, right? And neglected the cultural and economic impact
well,
or
you
importance of
can
Hollywood. So, and that's
partially
why
you
it's
can talk
diminished
all day.
influence and revenue in film. Yeah, you know what? I think the 100% tariff on foreign produced films is actually going to encourage domestic production because I think one of the biggest complaints that most people have been having in the past week is that it's too expensive to film in LA and whatever. That's the problem.
Mm,
And I think this situation will actually encourage domestic production and filming in LA because
mm,
the tariff intends to make foreign production less financially attractive.
Okay.
That's the point.
Okay.
So therefore, they'd be incentivizing studios to film within the United States. And not to mention, in the past decade, there's been an approximately, let's say, 40% decline in film production. Okay, I believe. Let's say 40%.
It's high. It's somewhere around there. Yeah, I believe.
Yeah, and guess what? That's partially, if not for the majority, due to international tax incentives drawing projects abroad.
Right, and it's
So by
not just
imposing,
abroad; it's
yeah,
domestically too. Other states
yeah,
in the U.S. are stepping up and giving tax breaks. South Carolina, Texas, Kentucky, Virginia,
hmm
Arizona, Colorado. I mean, there's a lot of places that are in the wake of California's hesitance to change. A lot of other states are stepping up and saying, "Hey, come film here. We'll give you a break on everything." And I think now
yeah,
California is realizing that they need to step up. But you know yourself how cumbersome film LA is to deal with.
yeah,
It's years outdated, and I think they're finally realizing that. And we want to see production to some extent stay in California because there's a reason why the studio is located in California in the early 20th century anyway. It's got things that it has to offer that other places don't. Really nice weather, really fine natural beauty, closeness to other parts of the country. And so I'd like to see it, LA come back. Will it? I don't know. It will take some adjustments on the bureaucratic end to make that happen, especially when other places in Europe, in the States, are stepping up and offering all these breaks and being aggressive about it. So it's
mhm.
potentially a good thing. I don't know. And it might be an empty political gesture. It's hard to say anymore. Um, but it could potentially help to keep things in LA. Not that it shouldn't go elsewhere, but again, it's a bigger part of the sea change, I think, in the overall industry. And again, without coming across as an expert, because I am not. But if you pay attention, there are certain discussions that are happening. On
You
the
are as much of an expert as you allow yourself to be.
Well, I
So
don't want to
you
come
know
across
more than
like
you
some
think.
kind of
No, no,
insider.
you
I
know,
want to make
no,
that
no, no.
very clear.
You know more than you think, and it's good to have these conversations because you know what I think. I think there's been an ineffective use of tax incentives. So, like,
Oh,
despite
absolutely.
billions, billions in tax credits, California is still losing productions to states like you said, like Georgia, New Mexico, and like New York as well.
Oh,
A lot of Netflix
absolutely.
productions have been like filmed in like Georgia,
Hmm.
and not
Yeah,
just Netflix,
Georgia's
like a
huge.
lot of
Atlanta, the Atlanta
productions.
area,
Yes,
huge.
yeah, because I know that Tosca Musk's production, Black Dagger Brotherhood, that was being filmed in Atlanta
Yep.
for
Because
Passion
they're
Flicks,
stepping up
which
with
is
all these
her
incentives.
thing.
These other
Yeah,
states are getting aggressive. Like, come here. We know it's going to bring revenue to the state. Bring it here. The problem is
yeah,
a lot of industry professionals, U.S. industry professionals, are based in the L.A., California area. Everyone from actors, famous and otherwise, to crew people, to producers, writers, directors. Their home base is there, which is another reason to keep things or keep some of the things in the Los Angeles area because that's where the
yeah.
studios are. That's where the talent, a lot of it is based, and because
But
of
the problem with California is that many of these like credits go to large legacy studios. So let's say like Warner Brothers or Disney,
right,
right?
right.
And they don't really trickle down to indie creators or smaller productions. And that's
I,
why filming has been such an issue because production costs are too high, too expensive. And for me, this just suggests that Newsom's current policies aren't working. Because California remains to be one of the most expensive states to
yes,
film.
for anything to live, to operate a business, to exist, the taxes and everything are
Yeah,
much higher than most of the rest of the country. Now, does it offer some things that other places don't have? Yes, like we mentioned, the weather, the natural beauty, the huge economy. California is now the fourth largest economy in the world. It just passed Japan in the most recent ranking. So if California were a country, it would be the fourth largest economy in the world. So there's no denying it's a powerhouse, and that's why a lot of us would like to see it hold on to its film industry legacy because there is such an advantage
yes,
in a lot of ways of being there. But they're
yes.
going to have to step up bureaucratically and politically and compete with these other states that are being very, very aggressive and taking that business away. So I mean, it's something that we'll have to see. It has yet to play out, but it's part, like as John Hamm said. John Hamm, who played Don Draper on Mad Men and a lot of other good characters recently, said on Bill Maher's podcast a couple of years ago, he had a really good take on it. He said, we're in the middle of a sea change in the business. Like when
Hmm.
VHS tapes came out, oh my God, it's going to destroy movie theaters. When DVDs came out, oh my God, it's going to destroy residuals and destroy our revenue model and destroy the theater experience. None of that happened. I think, to be on the positive side, we will find a way to adapt and change, because we have in the past too. The threat is the streaming model. Oh my God, streaming is going to destroy the residual model. It's going to destroy this. It has yet to be figured out because it's new. Will they figure it out? I think they will. I think eventually it will be figured out. But it's also coming on the back of things like COVID, which completely wrecked the entertainment industry for years. And then the back-to-back strikes, the actor strike, the writer strike, which happened concurrently, which hadn't happened since 1960 in this country. So the business has taken a lot of blows in the US, a lot of setbacks, one right on top of the other. Will it
Yeah.
eventually be figured out? I'm optimistic that it will be. We have
Well,
to
I
be.
think the issue is, like, d- didn't um didn't like Gavin Newsom advocate for like expanding the state's tax credit
Yeah,
program for film and
yeah,
television?
yeah.
Like,
That, well, quite a while
I don't
ago.
remember. Yeah, I don't remember the exact amount, but it was like
It was a
300
significant.
million
It
to
was
like
significant.
700 million or
Yeah.
something.
In fact, it was
Um,
enough to recently. We talked about this privately. It was enough to coax a major New York production to
yeah,
relocate to LA, which is big. I
yeah,
mean, and again, you want to see it. It needs to be a democratic process. It should go wherever the filming, wherever it best suits the production. They should go there. But
but I think even so, it this like alone failed to prevent industry decline because it's still being a problem. Like,
oh yeah,
it's still declined significantly, and I think the state is losing ground not to just other, states in the US, but to other countries and
absolutely. Yeah.
continents.
Well,
So
as we know, Christopher Nolan's big next project, The Odyssey, is being filmed in Greece and Cyprus.
and Italy as well.
And Italy as well. And those countries,
Yeah.
like other states, are stepping up with massive incentives to get people there and productions there.
Well, yeah, well, Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria are really cheap to film.
Yes. Hmm.
Very cheap. I mean, it's crazy. It's very cheap to film. So a lot of people are, because it's very low production cost. But I don't know, I think personally, like, Newsom's proposal for like a nationwide film tax credit is just an idea, not an actual policy. So like,
Maybe it's hard to tell.
Trump's tariff proposal, like, I don't really care if it's controversial or if people are deciding to reproduce, if people from the industry are deciding to make comments on this, because at least Trump's tariff is decisive, unlike Newsom. Newsom's approach just lacks urgency and
Well, and
impact.
again, without
And
getting too political, because fighting about
yeah,
politics in this day and age is ridiculous. But yeah, it might be
it's
just
not
another.
arguments, it's discussions. It's
Well, we're
discussions.
having a
I have a lot of good things. I have a lot of good things to say about Gavin Newsom. So but it's good to look at things, because so far, what do we have? Let's just look at the state of things. We have runaway productions. That's what they're called now. Productions running away off to Europe to film.
Yeah.
Um,
Although I will say this,
yeah,
smaller scale things that are not famous and fitted with multi-million dollar budgets, smaller scale productions, I noticed just in the casting calls I see as an actor here, there are many of them going on in LA. Smaller stuff, not with huge budgets, not with big stars, scaled back things, small miniseries, small features, shorts. There's a lot of that being made in LA still. I see casting probably a couple dozen a week anyway for productions that are being filmed, cast, and shot in LA and produced in LA. So there's a lot going on there. But like you said, a lot of the big budget stuff is looking for any reason to flee if they're given enough of an incentive by another state or another country. And as long as those states and countries step up with these kind of breaks, we're going to continue to probably see productions on a big scale go to those places where they can save money.
yeah. And also, I know that like, they say that they're saying that like John Voight is serving as a special ambassador to Hollywood. So apparently, like, Trump
Yeah,
and John
He's
had
got friends with
discussed plans.
certain segments
Yeah.
of that industry. And again, we have to remain to be seen because a lot of this stuff he might just be throwing stuff out there and seeing if it sticks. He does that a lot. And again, without taking political sides,
Well,
because
I
I'm not political anymore because it's gotten so nasty.
oh yeah. Well, I think I'm not sure who you mentioned there, but I mentioned John Voight. So the reason why I
Yeah,
mentioned
no,
him
he's
is that
one of them. Yeah.
he's been sourced in like discussions and stuff when it comes to like how to handle productions and stuff in America. And I can say this for a fact as of a month ago. If anyone knows what he's talking about, it's John Voight. And I say this because an actor that I worked with last month was filming in, God, I can't remember which country. It was either Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria. It was one of those countries in Europe. And he was on set with John Voight. And it was funny because apparently they would have breakfast every morning, and John Voight would like treat it as a Bible study, and he would read verses of them for them, which I find fascinating. No, I heard that he's a real actor. Like
Well,
he
he's an industry
just
veteran.
gets
Yeah.
to it. But like
And
he just gets to it. Like he was explaining to me his like thought process and how he approach works, and I respected that. So John Voight was literally, I don't know how long this was, maybe it was last year, maybe it was a few months back, but John Voight was literally a few months ago, if not a year ago, filming in Europe for a production that was probably a US production or an English production. Let's just say it was a US production. So he more than ever understands that productions have been dying out and they've been
as
moving
I
and
think,
filming
it's
in Europe.
indisputable. Of course, it's the numbers don't lie. Production is way down, and
Yeah.
without playing the blame game and blaming one person or another, it's down. It's just there's no disputing that fact. So yes, as someone as Pete, you and I both who love California and love the history of film in California, movies and music in California, we'd love to see them be able to retain a very good share of that marketplace. But things are going to have to change on the bureaucratic end to make things easier to operate there, easier and less expensive. That's how you're
Yeah.
going to keep them
Because
there.
you have
You
to
have
make it
to.
available to people to shoot.
Mhm. This is a business after all, and actors are really guilty of this too, of only looking at the artistic side and going into the business with Christmas in their eyes and thinking it's
Maybe.
just fame and everything. But there's the business end of it is you have to watch costs. You have to be cognizant of how much things cost. And if Ireland or Cyprus or Hungary or Romania is going to give a production a 30% tax credit to film there, they're going to go there, or give them breaks on lodging or transportation or
Yeah.
equipment usage. They're going to go there. And that's what
But I
we in
think
this
that's
country do.
but that's the purpose of the tariffs, to prevent people from shooting overseas, because
We'll
then
see. Yeah.
they're
Again,
limiting,
it's a new
like,
idea.
yeah,
We don't know how substantive it is. Potentially, is it a good thing? Possibly. We just don't know. It may
yeah.
just be another tactic to try to keep people to keep productions here so that they step up with tax credits. It might just be a threat to try to get them to act. You never really know with politics over here anymore.
Yeah.
But we were speaking.
It'll be interesting to watch, though. It'll be
And
interesting to
absolutely.
watch. Yeah,
Speaking of sea changes, though, that's kind of a good segue into what we want to really do today,
exactly.
which is
Yes.
talk about wrap up Laurel Canyon, which we really didn't get to finish last time, and talk about.
Are you sure we didn't?
Not exact because you brought up some good stories about bands and things forming in the canyon that we didn't get to talk about, and which are just kind of fun.
Oh,
So I have a couple. I don't have a bunch of stuff to show this time, not like last time, but I do have 3 records back here that
you're
kind of
going to
symbolize.
have to refresh my memory. Yes, please go ahead.
We will. So we're kind of looking at the Laurel Canyon conclusion, the second half of the canyon. What we talked about last time, a couple of weeks ago, was the early exciting part where the birds came in and the turtles and the mamas and the papas, the 60s to the like 1969. What we're going to look at today, at least impartially, is looking at 1969 in terms of 2 records mainly. The first Crosby, Stills and Nash record, and then Deja Vu. Both were recorded in 1969. This one was recorded in early 69. Everyone knows this. I showed this briefly the last time. This is a huge record. Still sells to this day. Still downloaded. This was recorded in the winter, January, February, I think, of 69.
I love
really,
I love that cover. I love the pose. It's just,
well, even the cover has a story without getting too far up in the weeds. But this when they were recording this record, and it was recorded at Wally Heider's Studio 3 in LA, which it's not there anymore, but it's a coffee shop or something now. But outside the coffee shop, there's a plaque that says like former location of Wally Heider Studio 3, and it listed all the musicians that recorded there. And it was big. Anybody who was anybody did something there. And this first record was recorded there. And Stephen Stills was famous because he played almost all the instruments on the record, because he was a multi-instrumentalist and super crazy talented to this day. He played lead guitar, rhythm guitar, bass guitar, organ, piano, some drums, percussion. He played everything. And then David and Graham played, lead guitar on their songs. But they weren't good enough on guitar, and they readily admitted that they couldn't keep up with him to play as many instruments or play live. So this was recorded in January and February, I believe, of '69. And the story about the cover, and again, a lot of people will know this if they're Laurel Canyon music nuts, is that this cover was photographed outside an abandoned house. They drove around, the guys drove around LA with the famous photographer Henry Diltz, who took this picture, and who took a lot of famous Laurel Canyon pictures of musicians and actors and things in the '60s. And so he's on Instagram, really interesting guy, nice guy. He's got a whole film archive of pictures he's taken. But they drove past this house, and it was abandoned, beat up, and kind of crappy looking, and this couch was sitting there. So they just took a picture of them on this couch. But when they took the picture, they realized later that they were in the wrong order: Nash, Stills, Crosby. So it's not in the right order. So they said, shit.
It's so nice though. It's funny.
They go, oh, well, we could just go back to the house and take another picture in the right order. It'll take a few minutes, and then we can use that. But when they got there, like 2 days later, the house had been bulldozed.
I like that photo though. I like it.
It's legendary. They use the right one. It doesn't matter if they're in the right order. It's a legendary shot. I mean, it's like the record that started the second half of the music era in the Canyon. But the feeling of this record, unlike the next one, kind of reflects the feeling in the city in early '69 versus late '69. This one has it's very bright. It's quintessential mid-period California sound. It's rocking, but it's gentle, it's breezy, it's fun. There's a lot of optimism in the record. The music is bright. The other one, which I'll get to in a minute, is not that way. So this kind of epitomizes what the decade or what the year started like. The guys were all getting along. They were having fun making a record, and it was going well. The music was largely upbeat and fun. And it just that's kind of how 1969 was prior to the crimes, which again, we don't want to talk about the gory details because everybody else in the world does that. And they continue.
We don't.
They
don't want
to. We said
to.
privately yesterday, without going too far off subject, some of these YouTubers, and they know who they are, not just YouTubers, but documentarians and writers, they continue to beat this stuff into oblivion and only talk about the crimes and only show the crime scene photographs, which never should have gotten out of LA Police Department headquarters, by the way. They were snuck out by reporters.
Yeah.
They continue to just hammer on the gory details of the crimes and talk about Manson as a guru and the family and all this stuff. It's like, how much longer are they going to beat this stuff to death and ignore the people who are involved?
For as long as they keep making money off of it.
As long as they keep some of these YouTubers, and they know who they are. And I'm not going to, it's just really annoying because they get on there and they make video after video after video after video about the crimes. And all they talk about is Manson. It's like, get off it. Manson was a criminal. He was a gutter rat nobody whose only talent was manipulating people who were broken. And these people, mass media just turns him into some kind of counterculture folk hero. So we'll let the YouTubers with no scruples continue to do that because they will do it to increase their following. What we're going to talk about is how the feeling in the city that changed in the wake of that. So this record, and the reason I pulled these is that this record kind of reflects the early optimism of 1969 and kind of that whole decade up until then. Later in 1969 came, which is also a killer record. This is Deja Vu. And again, most people will know this record. This was recorded in San Francisco, mostly at Wally Heider's in San Francisco. And I think the fall of '69, it wasn't released till early 1970. So these are both recorded in '69. But the feel and the vibe of this record is very different from that one. And also you have the added addition of Neil Young, who is going to bring a little bit more of an edge and darkness and intensity to the music than just those three guys. As Crosby has said, this is a very different band from Crosby, Stills, and Nash. So the tone of this record is a little bit more edgy, a little bit darker. The songs are not as optimistic, and it just kind of has a kind of a heavier feel to it. Still a fantastic record, but very different in tone from the first one. And it kind of reflects how the end of 69 versus the beginning of 69 was. And plus the guys in the band, although this picture, I don't know if you can see this front picture is really famous. This was taken somewhere in Laurel Canyon. They dressed up in these like Revolutionary War outfits and they like double expose the photograph to get this old look on it. It's a really cool record. But when the guys made the first record, their personal lives were going well. Stephen Stills was dating Judy Collins. They were happy, although that was starting to fall apart. Graham Nash was with Joni Mitchell. Things were going great. Crosby was with his girlfriend. And the music just had reflected the good place that the guys were in personally then. Between that record and this record, Stephen Stills broke up with Judy Collins. Graham Nash and Joni Mitchell were on the downslope. They were going to break up shortly thereafter. Crosby's girlfriend, Christine Hinton, was tragically killed in a car wreck, which changed his outlook on life forever. Graham Nash has said he never really recovered from that accident. Christine Hinton was who he loved very much, was driving some animals to the vet to get a checkup and was sideswiped by a school bus that didn't stop. And she was killed instantly. So the sessions were, and then Neil Young being Neil Young, just as intense and kind of dark anyway. So that their personal lives were kind of an upheaval by the second half of 1969 when they made this record. So there's still some optimistic songs in here. Our House, Teach Your Children, Graham Nash's famous hits off of here, but the rest of them are a little dark. And it just kind of reflects the change not only in their personal lives, but in the city. Because as we know what happened in the city after those crimes and how things changed.
Yeah. Well, it changed Los Angeles forever. And I think most of the recollections, and this is why I brought up Joan Didion's book, The White Album, because I think it's such a great way, if you want to transport yourself into a place, well, the place, should I say, and just understand what it was like for people. Her writing is beautiful. It's extraordinary. She's just very good. And it's just, she really gets to the point as to what it was like. And you hear all these recollections and stories of, people like John and Michelle Phillips, Steve McQueen, even Terry. They all slept with a gun under their bed, a pistol under their bed. Michelle Phillips used to say that we put guns in our purses and stuff, and we walked, like, people like lived in fear. Like, it really changed everything, and it kind of put an end to the freedom of the house parties, the open door, open house parties, and all of that. It really changed a lot.
Yeah, it was no longer just
it changed a lot.
Yeah.
So I think it's good to look into that, but I also don't consider it to be, much like we mentioned last time, it's not. It doesn't seem unusual at all to think that the style of a particular band or a particular musician changes in the end of a decade compared to the early years of that decade, because that musician has gotten older, trends have changed, and have revolutionized. And the 60s was all about revolutionizing yourself as much as possible and getting to the future. Whatever modernity meant for them at the time, they were constantly chasing after it, trying to figure out what it meant. So, and that happens generally, like towards the end of the decade. Yes, music changes. It's it's the circle of life, according to the music industry.
That's very true. I wanted to pull those two records in particular because they really kind of reflect the difference in the first half versus the second half of the year.
Sure, yeah.
And they're both. I love both of these records. They're classics. But the feel is very different, and it's very much in line with beginning of 69 and the optimism versus the end. And also along with that, I wish I had the Joan Didion book to show last time. It's packed in storage, I think, somewhere. I didn't have that one handy, but you're right. That is a wonderful book about the times, beautifully written like she does, and very insightful. So if anyone who has not read that book is following us and wants more information about this time that isn't exploitative, Joan Didion's book.
It's a great book. It's a great book. Yeah.
Anything she does is wonderful, but that one in particular, as it relates to what we're talking about, definitely one to check out. And things did change. The feel of the city changed in the wake of what happened. Again, not focusing on what everybody else does and the crime scene photos and the salaciousness of it, but it isn't. It's not something we can completely ignore. The feeling of the city and the country changed. I mean, like you said, the house parties were now by invitation only. There was security. There wasn't just come in and sit down, bring some weed and play your guitar and hobnob with all these famous people. It was, okay, who are you? What are you doing here? Were you invited? And we still see that today. It's carried over all these decades later to the point where it's still a very guarded place. I mean, imagine a music star of Dennis Wilson's caliber today. I don't know who that is because I don't know many modern musicians, but pick a famous modern musician today. Would they pull over and pick up two hippie chicks on the side of the road without knowing anything about them? It would never happen today. It would never.
And if they did, they'd probably get them to sign an NDA, celebrity
Exactly.
NDA.
Right.
You know which ones I'm talking about. Yeah. So it's probably what they do. I don't know. Maybe someone like Drake would.
The likelihood is far less now. I mean, it's just too
Or
much.
actually, maybe I spoke too soon. I don't know, but there's a few they always like to talk about, but I think after what's happened with Diddy, unfortunately, there's
No.
a lot of names we won't know. There's too many names, in fact,
Mm,
but that's not fun. Really
right.
not fun.
No, it's horrible. But as a direct result of what happened in 1969 and 1970 with the trial coming after the crimes, the feeling changed, and the openness was no longer there. And you see it today. It's a very closed off world. It's people fight to get in there, but there's too many lunatics who are trying to get in. And the walls are up around the music business, the entertainment business, the film business, theater. It's just, there's a separation now between audience and artist that wasn't there so much back then. And the fallout from what happened
I think I also think that from then on, something that we can see today that probably was affected by those events onwards is the way people have utilized fame and maybe public spheres of work, because I think it's not just about visibility, it's also about intrigue. And I think a lot of people, they're not actually meant to be famous because they have a visibility problem and they have a problem with being seen. But interestingly enough, that is probably the only thing that Charles Manson has in common with what doesn't work today. So despite of what we've made out of him, we've made a name out of him, turned him into a pop culture figure. He wasn't able to he wouldn't ever be, first of all, the only attention span that he could keep people's attention were his cult followers. He had to give them LSD and drugs and MDMA and all sorts of things to keep their attention. But you have to feel safe being perceived by massive amounts of people. And he didn't even feel safe with the slightest judgment by five guys at a studio.
Because he wasn't a professional.
Yeah. So Charlie could actually never become famous because he had too much paranoia going on.
Well, he became famous, but not in the way he originally intended. And
his
fame has been perpetuated.
But he became famous behind bars. That's the thing.
Right. Yeah.
He's never experienced famous to walking out into the world and people knowing him.
Right.
Like people speaking to him and stuff.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So I think it's usually more evolved people have the resource of fame. And I would say that, was Charlie talented? No. Could that have been sorted if he was in his right senses and got the training to get better and do stuff? Like if Terry wanted to put him to work, maybe. Because I think the issue today with fame is that you don't actually need to get better at your craft, or you don't need another certification, because if fame were about talent, then at least half the people we know today who are famous wouldn't have been famous right now. And because there's people that have mastered their craft, that are creative entrepreneurs, but they're invisible. So are famous people the most skilled people? No. So that's the difference. Like back then, it mattered.
Right.
it mattered a lot because even with Paul Revere and the Raiders, I came across an interview that Mark gave and talked about his experiences with Terry. And interesting enough, Terry was as hard on Paul Revere and the Raiders as he was on the Birds. And he would say that, like, Terry would say things like, "Look, I can't use you guys. You take forever, and I'm used to working with professional musicians." And how
Mhm.
when Paul Revere and the Raiders first signed with CBS, Terry really didn't know what to do with them.
Mhm.
So they tried various things with songs, gave him things to start on, um, and I know that Terry was a big fan of Mark, and thought he was
Yeah.
important. That's what Mark
Mhm.
said, that he thought I was going to be a star and that I was important. And he said that I tried to convince Terry that yes, I thought I was important, but the band was all part of it. So I
Mhm.
told
Right.
him to try and use the guys again. So he was tough on everyone, but it's just about maintaining business relationships. And I don't think Charlie could have done that because I think he had a big fear of being seen. He wouldn't have been able to handle, and he wouldn't be able to like keep people's attention. He could
No.
only do that
Could
with
he
his
handle
followers
criticism?
by
Could he
brainwashing
handle
them.
constructive criticism from a producer? Probably not. So the bottom line,
No.
he just was not a professional. He was not a professional. He was never going to be recorded by somebody like Terry. He wasn't in the league of these people and so many of the other ones that came through Laurel Canyon. I do want to touch on just a couple other stories that you actually brought up last time that we didn't get to because we just were able to talk about other things for so long. But there are a couple of really cool stories about bands getting together in Laurel Canyon. And the first one, I pulled this one. This is retrospective. This is Buffalo Springfield's greatest hits. This came out in 1969, a year after the band broke up. So what the record company
That's
Atco
a
did
great
was,
cover.
it's cool, yeah. It basically just puts their best hits on this one compilation. It's a really good. It sounds good. It's produced well. But these guys, funny enough, they got together because Stills had known Neil Young on tour in Canada because Neil Young was Canadian, was playing up there, and they had always kind of talked about casually putting a band together. And this is a well-known story, but for those who haven't heard it, it's kind of interesting. They Stills ended up in California with Richie Furay, who would also become part of this band. And Neil Young came down illegally from Canada to try to find Stills to form this band. And he looked all over the LA area for a couple of weeks trying to find Stephen Stills. And he had given up. He was driving on Sunset Boulevard north towards San Francisco. And he passed Stephen Stills and Richie Furay in a car going the other way. And they just happened to see each other. So they stopped and then hooked up and got together. And they made all this great music as Buffalo Springfield. Didn't last only but a couple of years because for many, many reasons. But that's a cool Canyon story of a band getting together against all odds and then making some really, really incredible music from that
Oh
time.
wow.
So
Can I
that's Billy Preston talked about that on the Memory Field documentary, but that's a really cool story. And then you brought up how these guys first sang together and the legend that goes along with that. And that's also a well-known
yeah.
story, but it's funny because even the guys in the band can't agree on when they first sang together. It happened in Laurel Canyon.
Because they
That
were
they agree.
high. They don't remember because they were
Probably,
stoned. They were too stoned to
probably.
remember. That's probably it.
Stills has always
But can
said,
I ask you something?
yeah,
But sorry, can you show me the other cover again?
yeah.
Sorry, yeah.
No, it's cool. Their covers are trippy like this.
You know what? It reminds me of the Gruffalo, the children's book.
Yeah,
Do you know
their
the
artwork was always,
Gruffalo?
yeah, their artwork was always
And the
cool.
fact that I even remember that the Gruffalo wasn't my favorite children's book. My favorite children's book was The Magic Paintbrush, um, which I don't know if I think it's by the same author, Julia Donaldson.
That one I don't know.
It's about a girl called Shen, and she's given an amazing magic paintbrush, and she's basically told to never paint for the rich people. So she paints things for the poor, like she paints food and water and stuff, and she just paints. And yeah, it's a great book. I buy it for every baby I meet.
Oh, that's sweet.
The magic
That's
paintbrush.
that's really
My
cool.
niece
Yeah,
has
but
a copy. Yeah. So it
they're
reminded me of the Gruffalo, but I like that cover. But you know what's funny? They don't remember when the first time when they performed with each other
these
because
guys didn't. Yeah,
Because they were stoned.
Probably.
They were stoned. That's why they don't remember.
There's two versions of it for the history books that are basically out there. Stephen Stills has always said that the first time they sang together was at Cass Elliott's house, the famous house in Laurel Canyon where everybody went to hang out. He said they first met up there and sang together, but the other two have long said that no, that didn't happen there. That happened at Joni Mitchell's Little Green Bungalow on Lookout Mountain Drive on the other side of Laurel Canyon. The story.
Interesting. So they're looking at recollections of when they first hanged out and improvised.
When they first sang, it's a cool
okay.
Story. So
okay,
Still
because
says it
I
was
thought they were. Yeah, I thought they were going. Yes, I thought they were mentioning like they can't remember the first time they performed publicly together, which I think would have been a bit ridiculous.
That was actually,
I'm sure you would have recorded that, like historical records. There's historical records knowing like when bands performed together at places.
Think so.
Yeah.
Their first gig was in Chicago as a trio, or I think Neil Young was playing with them by that point because that was the summer of '69. They played at their first public gig as Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young 2 days before Woodstock in Chicago. They went from Chicago to Woodstock, and then Woodstock was their second gig together. And you could hear there's footage of them up on stage going, and Stephen Stills is like, man, this is our second gig together as a trio or a foursome. We're scared shitless. And they went on to put on a really cool set. And all the other famous bands were standing behind him at Woodstock. But the generally accepted version of how they got together, at least the one that Nash and Crosby agree on, was that Nash and Joni Mitchell were pretty much an item by the summer of '68. He had come to Laurel Canyon from England to spend some time with her, took a cab to her house, showed up, and he heard voices inside the house. He's like, what the hell? I want to spend time with her. But he goes in there and it's Stills and Crosby having dinner.
Oh, wow.
So they go in there and they talk and everything, probably smoke a few joints, like you said, let's be honest.
I'm sure, yeah.
They, Crosby and Stills, they were hanging out together as a duo because they had their bands had fallen apart. David had been fired from the Byrds and the Springfield had fallen apart. So they had been hanging out trying to get something together. And then Stills and Crosby sang "You Don't Have to Cry," which is on this record. And then Nash, this is not an obscure story, it's famous. Nash says, okay, sing it again. And they sing it again. And then Nash puts the top harmony part on of "You Don't Have to Cry." Completely spontaneously. It wasn't months in the studio or it wasn't set up, structured studio time. They just spontaneously sang together either at Cass or most likely at Joni's house. And they're like, what just happened? This sound is incredible. And that's how they were born. At least two of the three of them agree on that version. But I think they all agree that the song they first sang together was "You Don't Have to Cry" and harmonized a cappella on that song. And then hence this record came about. Yeah. Another cool Canyon story of a band getting together, which you mentioned last time, but we didn't get a chance to talk about. And then there's another funny story about when Neil Young was going to be they were thinking about adding him to the band because they needed another strong guitarist who could match Stephen Stills on lead. And the other two admitted they couldn't do it technically as well as Neil Young did. So they brought Neil Young in. And the story that Crosby always told was he was sitting in Joni Mitchell's driveway again around the time they were debating on whether he should be made a part of the band. Neil Young pulls up in his car, passes him on the road, does a U-turn, comes back around, pulls his guitar out, sits on the hood of his car, and plays Crosby acoustically like 4 of his newest songs. And Crosby said at that point, I wanted Neil Young in the band. So once that happened, and once Graham Nash approved his entry into the band, they became the group of 4. And then they went on to break up and reform and kill it on stages for years and years and years to come, either as the foursome or as the original trio. So just another interesting and fun Canyon story of how bands got together and what the scene was like then, and then how much it changed in the later half of the 60s into the 70s. And not only the crimes happened, which made everybody more on guard, but in terms of Laurel Canyon changed because a lot of these original people who made the Canyon famous, is the more successful they got, the more protective they've got of their material, the more money they made. And so they went elsewhere in LA and got better houses. So before, in this early era, was like, hey man, let me play you a new song. And they would all play it together. And no one was like thinking of copyright law back then. As they started to make more money and get more famous, all of a sudden they were more protective of their tunes. And then they moved to bigger and better houses outside of Laurel Canyon. Because remember, as we said, the main draw of Laurel Canyon in the early 60s was that it was cheap for musicians to live who hadn't made it yet. Once they made it, they moved elsewhere.
They moved out to the
Yeah.
more expensive. Yeah.
Even though Joni Mitchell still owns that famous green house on Lookout Mountain and has since
Yeah.
she bought it in 60, she hasn't lived
But
there.
she saved it. She saved it for sentimental reasons because of all the things she created while
Yes.
staying there.
Well, and not only
and
that, but
she's
there was
yeah.
I don't mean to interrupt you, sorry. There was a fire that broke out next door to that house in the early 70s and burned the house next door to hers completely down. But her house didn't burn. The front door was really thick and it was made of oak, and it kept the fire at bay. So even though the house next to hers burnt completely to the ground, hers house didn't burn. So ever since
She
then,
was
she
just
kind of
very
thought,
lucky. So she's
yeah,
just been maybe, yeah, superstitious about it as well.
yeah. So
Just how the home
she's
was
held on
saved. It
to
was
it.
just meant to be for her. Yes.
Mhm.
That's
She's lived
nice.
in Bel Air since like the mid 70s. Again, more money you make, the more successful you get, you go out and get a bigger house. But she does still own that little house because she thinks it is kind of protected by a higher power. And she made so much of her best music there that she will probably keep it until the day she dies. So yeah, that tended to happen. People got more protective, more paranoid, and then you had different drugs enter the scene too, rather than just pot and LSD, which are relatively harmless compared to heroin and cocaine and MDMA. Cocaine found its way into the canyon, so it made people more paranoid and revved up, and it changed the feeling of it. Things got more aggressive and instead of laid back in the early 70s versus the mid to late 60s. So yeah, those two records really kind of show the transition. And then of course you had Altamont at the end of the year, which really kind of ended that feel good era of the 60s.
Well, I also think that the drug use made people more, I think people became more paranoid, should I say,
Sure, absolutely.
Towards drug use, because back in the 60s, they were going to all these house parties, and what comes to mind very prominently is Cass Elliott's home, which I'm pretty sure had everything you could find and more.
Probably, yeah.
And some more. And I just think that because for years when the Manson trials took place, because the people responsible tried to victimize themselves and say that we were under the use of drugs and stuff. Well, you know what? A lot of people have taken drugs. They didn't go out killing people.
Exactly.
So I think that played.
Apart.
Yeah, so I think that played upon people's fears that, oh my God, what if I take drugs that are so hard that it completely changes my brain chemistry forever, which it will. And I just lose control over my own actions and I just do whatever. So I think I don't because I do think that the crimes had a big impact, and I do believe that people lived in fear in the sense that
oh, absolutely,
I'll lose control over my senses. What if I'm capable of now killing someone because I did this, because I took this, which is a bit I don't like the blaming the drugs kind of
no, they're still adults and they still made adult decisions.
Yeah.
And I think we should just reemphasize again, when we talk about our series and we talk about the history of LA and the Laurel Canyon and everything, we're not trying to downplay the crimes and the repercussions of it. We're not trying to ignore it and pretend like it didn't happen. You can't.
Yeah, we're not, or else that would be a lie.
It's a lie, and it's naive. Of course it happened. Very, very sadly it happened. The problem that we have is people only focusing on that and looking at everything through the lens of the criminals and what they did, rather than the people who were affected and the families who still continue to be affected to this day. Like Anthony DiMaria, Jay's nephew, talked about in his recent interviews. That's the problem that the survivors have with the people who exploit this stuff, is that they only focus on the crimes, the criminals, and their motives, when it doesn't matter. What matters is those who were affected. Put yourself in their position and you begin to understand. Like he said in the documentary, Anthony said, what if it were your family that these people did this stuff to? would you be so willing to just sit there and cash in and exploit it? No. If you look at it through that lens, your perspective can't help but change. That's the issue we have. We're trying to tell the other story.
And the issue, well, the big issue is that I think we already know what has happened. I think what's crazy is that the killers, the recollections of what happened that night were told by these killers, and we have taken these recollections and their testimonies and whatever they've reported, and we've personalized it. We've dug so deep, and we've produced so many films and shows and documentaries showing everyone exactly what took place that night as if we've lived it. I don't understand why we have to get so personal. And I don't understand why we're still exploring the crimes after so many years as if we don't know about things already. That's why I don't think it's necessary to elaborate on the Manson crimes anymore or have another Manson special.
There's nothing revelatory.
There's nothing new to learn or pick up on anything. There's
just
nothing.
People continuing to milk it for their own benefit financially and exposure wise, because they know that there's a certain element who will tune in. But I think that element is shrinking. Judging by how much positive reception just you and I have gotten from these videos and focusing on the lives of the people versus the crimes.
Okay, let's get YouTube on. On. I have to laugh. It's funny to me because it's very funny to me because Tim he gets so happy when he sees the YouTube comments. He gets so happy, and he likes to mention on all the positive comments that all the positive comments and that we're receiving. Meanwhile, anytime I log on to my YouTube, I get notifications seeing the worst comments ever. So it's very funny. Like someone wrote yesterday, literally saw this yesterday. I didn't even tell you about this. Nothing to be learned here about Sharon. That was the first.
Okay, well that goes against the dozen positive comments that happen. But people are always going to look for
nothing to learn here about Sharon. Well, if this Lenwetch2195, if you're stumbling upon this video, let me give you a fun fact about Sharon. Sharon was very liberal. She was pro birth control, pro the pill, because it was prominent in the 60s, and she was just very pro that thing. She even gave an interview saying how she lives with Roman, and she says it's good for you to live with someone before you get married. When you're in she was very liberal. Her views were very liberal, so that's a fun fact, since there's nothing to be learned here about Sharon.
Well,
in this video,
whenever anybody puts anything in the public domain, there's going to be critics and there's going to be people who like it. The part that I'm encouraged by is that there's a lot more positive than negative, and that there does seem to be some interest in the lives of these people versus just how the lives ended. That's what I like. I mean,
I'm just going to have to read these. I'm going to have to read these to laugh. Don't emulate, create by the same person. The female here is ready to correct without facts. Just know what she's talking about. Sharon had a mid-Atlantic accent. That's what we said. We said she had a mid-Atlantic accent. Well, the female is Tina Kilberg, by the way. The female is Tina Kilberg. Sharon had a mid-Atlantic accent developed under Ranzerhoff. They wanted to train so she'd feel confident. I'm pretty sure we've mentioned that. Pretty sure we mentioned the training.
But you're going to get something like that. People who just want
someone on the Cielo Drive video that I made years ago commented, "Well, you're wrong." Okay. And then someone was complaining about buying into the Bugliosi Terry Melcher fantasy. No thanks. Don't leave out his perjury in the 1970 trial. Okay.
Well, you've talked about that ad nauseum.
Okay.
Legally, that's not even worth going into.
Yeah.
Don't drive yourself nuts with the negative.
What I did, I was, no, actually, you know what? It's more, I think I just want can people ask questions? Can we do this? Can you guys just ask questions and I'll be happy to address everything? I think that's much more convenient and productive than.
And if we don't know, we'll tell you. We'll tell you if we don't know.
Yeah, because just, I don't know. I mean, I don't have the testimony on me. I should get it printed. I had a printed copy and I don't know where it went. So I'll reprint a copy if I need to. But I think the issue is he recognizes Watson, describes his appearance, discusses changes being made to his appearance as to when he saw him and stuff. And I just think that instead of believing anything that's written in a book, someone committed perjury so and so, which, by the way, there was no evidence to show otherwise. And I'd really encourage people to look into Terry's testimony. Did Terry file false police reports? Did he file false documents? Did he offer false evidence? Did he prepare for false evidence? Not really. Deliberately lying about specifics of a crime is what constitutes perjury. And you have to remember that Vincent Bugliosi was working on this for years. He was assigned to this when he was 35 years old. All his notes were handwritten. He was one of the strongest people ever. And he knew he was fighting for the death penalty. And the capital punishment got abolished in 1971, I believe, in California.
71 or
1972. 71 or 2. I keep forgetting. Had he brought in more unnecessary information and not kept unnecessary details out, also known as agenda setting, which is what everyone does, if you're a lawyer especially.
Sure.
If something doesn't fit your case, you're not going to waste time and elaborate and bring it into the courtroom. That's not lying. It's just management. And lawyers meet with their clients or whoever's giving a testimony in advance, and they go through things. And, the lawyer says, when you get on the stand, in the cross-examination, I'm going to ask you the following questions. They might quickly do a rehearse thing. That happens. Anyway. I'm kind of fed up with this. So I think
you know what? Don't drive yourself nuts.
I feel like now no one's. I feel like now I'm not going to see any comments, which is, it's like I don't want people to disappear completely and not leave any comments. But I wouldn't be surprised if you guys ghosted and left no comments.
Well,
but
people are going to say whatever they want to say. I mean, people, you put something out there, people are going to
ask comments. Ask me comments, and I'll be happy to go through them. Ask me comments. Just ask comments. Write your comments down, and I'll be happy to answer them and address them.
Mm-hmm. And again, if Tina doesn't know something, or I don't know, between the two of us, we know a lot, but we don't know everything. And we'll frankly admit that.
Tim, I've been studying Sharon Tate for how many years? I know enough on Sharon Tate. I don't need a user without any videos and a random name telling me I don't know what I'm talking about. If I don't know what I'm talking about, he can leave.
For your own mental well-being.
Like,
don't dwell on the negative people. Certain people will go online just to tear other people down and criticize.
Okay then, Tim, and you don't romanticize the positive people and the positive comments, because a little positivity doesn't come a long way. No, because at the end of it's nice that people are leaving comments, but I don't know. I'm just completely immune to. I just shake off comments, because if it's good or if it's bad, it's not pushing me in the direction that I need. I need to push myself in the direction that I need. And the only way to do that is through getting the right financiers and people involved to get the series made. That's the purpose at the end of the day.
The only point I made with the comment, want to make with the comments, is that it was encouraging to see that there wasn't just interest in the crimes. That's my only point.
Because we didn't talk about the crimes. We talked about other stuff.
If you look at the way media has portrayed those times in the documentaries and films and books that have been written, almost all of it is from the perspective, like we've said many times, of the criminals, and glorifying the criminals and making them out to be more than they are. I was just encouraged by the fact that people seem to be interested in the stuff we're talking about, because I originally doubted that there was any interest beyond the macabre, the salacious, and the crime aspects. But some of those comments show that, hey, there are people who are interested, and that's encouraging.
Oh, there's definitely interest, because we're exploring so many bands, so many musicians, actors, famous people at the times. It's essentially a biopic about many people and how they lived, and these people have a fan base. So anyone's going to be interested in studying these people and how they lived, even if it's a minor role, even if it's Paul McCartney at a house party with Terry, spending time together and stuff, and John Lennon, because he frequently spoke and befriended those two. It's those little things, like people want to see that sort of thing. They want to see these interactions, and I'm sure fans of the Mamas and the Papas would like to see. And I feel like it gets more personalized because I know that people have made uh, Beatles and Beach Boys biopics, exploring Brian Wilson's genius and also his issues as well.
Do you know the
He thinks,
speaking of that, do you
yes,
know the Laurel Canyon story about John Lennon meeting Brian Wilson at Mickey Dolenz house? Have
I've come across it. Yes,
you heard that story?
um, yes, and I think what's good is that even though there's biopics based on these bands, you if you watch the series and you love these people and their music, you're going to see more personalized interactions of them and
Mhm.
really see them moving about as people, not just we're these stars behind the scenes, this is how we made it big, because it's not just about making it big, it's about the relationships between people and
Right.
the culture and ideas, new ideas turning and counterculture. You know, we're moving away from 1940s and the post-war and the post-war times from the 1930s, 1940s, and the 1950s, and we're entering the 1960s. The styles have changed, the way people have moved have changed. It was the old generation versus the new, and it's so
Mhm.
amazing. And that's what counterculture was ultimately fighting for. So, and I think that's what, as I mentioned, in probably the first episode, that's what drove Terry and Candace very close together, because they both had parents who were very influential and very famous, but they came from the old generation, very strict generations. And even though they came from rich families, they were still embracing counterculture and trying to modernize themselves. And between the generation of their parents and the new generation that was coming in.
Wasn't the term for that, and it was applied to them, but also Sharon and Roman, was anti-establishment establishment, like kind
Yes, anti-establishment
of
establishment.
the
That's
new
correct.
generation of rich, jet-setting, freedom-loving people of the who were born in the 1940s and late 1930s. That was a
Yeah, I
comment. That
mean,
was the term that
wasn't it Roman? Yeah, and wasn't it Roman who said in that interview, what Sharon gave after they got married? He said, "I married a hippie, not a housewife."
right. I think
Didn't
so.
he say
Yeah.
that? Yeah,
Hmm. Yeah, and I think you
but
mentioned the bands of the time. We should probably mention. I think Joan Didion wrote about it too. There are basically two major events that signaled kind of the end of that feel-good era of the '60s. One, of course, was the crimes of the summer of '69. The other, of course, was the Altamont Free Concert in at the Altamont Raceway out in the middle of nowhere. That happened in December. That's not an obscure story. It's a famous story, but it's worth mentioning. The Altamont Free Concert was supposed to be what they called the West Coast Woodstock, meaning they wanted, and it was orchestrated by the Rolling Stones. They saw what happened, and they didn't play Woodstock, so they saw what happened at Woodstock and how successful that was in August. They wanted to put on a free concert in California and call it the West Coast Woodstock and have it go much the same way. Hundreds of thousands of people get together in a spirit of free will and goodwill. Music gets played, people have a good time, nobody gets hurt. But it didn't work out that way. That happened in December, and the as Billy Preston mentions on the Memory Field documentary, they weren't California natives. They were English, of course, so they didn't really know the vibe of the city and how it had changed. And in their infinite wisdom, looking back on it, which is easy to do, they hired Hell's Angels to be the concert security rather than a professional security team. So that right there set the stage for some potentially bad things happening. And the Hell's Angels were drunk. They were beating up the onlookers and the concert. One poor guy got killed, was standing near the stage. They beat him to death. And the performers were up on stage going, at one point, calm down. Mick Jagger was begging everybody to calm down, but the stage had been set. It was a much more tense affair. It was edgier. The weather was shitty. People were not in as good a mood. The Hells Angels were making everybody tense. And Crosby, Stills and Nash were one of the big bands that played Altamont. A lot of big bands played Altamont. They wanted it to be Woodstock Part 2. It was not. It was very much other. And when that went south and that poor guy got killed and other people got beat up, it just kind of signaled the end of that for real. And it coincided with the chronological end of the 1960s because that happened early December. And then the air just kind of went out of it. So as much as they wanted to create another Woodstock and had very good intentions, the Rolling Stones, it backfired. It was, and the people who played it, the performers who played that concert, said as soon as they got there and they got on stage, they knew something was wrong. It was just a very different feeling. Again, reflecting the end of the year versus the beginning of the year and how much had changed since then. Really, really unfortunate, because it could have been another Woodstock type affair, but it was a different world by that point.
Yeah. Very painful. Yeah.
And then after that, you had was the increase in the paranoia and the end of the freewheeling 60s.
And I just think it was just very painful for a lot of people, because it was just, they just killed the innocence, should I say, and it's not entirely, you can't really say innocence when there's so much drug use, but
No,
it killed the kind of, it felt harmless, I think. It felt harmless. All of these things felt harmless. And then suddenly you take something so beautiful, an environment, the open house parties, friendship, trust, openness, free love, and all of that. And then you just realize that the same people who are thriving off of what you're thriving are out there in Spawn Ranch, becoming really delusional, becoming really brainwashed, and deciding to go out and murder people, the same people that you would invite to your home, and just out of love, and not look into how much money the other person had. Even if you were part of the establishment, you wouldn't just invite them with so much love into your home and make sure they had a good time. So it was just, and I don't want to play on the word innocence, because these people were taking drugs, and by no means, as much as you try to be carefree and calm about it, there is no innocence in taking drugs. That comes with a level of responsibility. So I think it was just very painful, because they didn't just lose their best friends, which was what Sharon was to a lot of these people. And just people who have claimed to have been close with her, because I'm sure everyone wanted to associate with her after.
Oh, sure.
Unfortunately.
That.
Yeah.
So I was invited there that night. I was supposed to be there. Half the town said they were supposed to be there, and none of it was true.
Yes. But I think also just friends of hers demanding to pay thousands of dollars if someone could give them the names of the killers, and putting out posters and stuff. But I think all of that was, they just realized that they could never really enjoy life the way they did back then. That
no,
it
was like Crosby said, and as much as there are issues with Crosby, and everybody who's known Crosby had issues with Crosby, for better or worse, he did sum it up really well. That whole kind of time when he said it was a moment in history where it was a peak of human existence. Los Angeles from like 64 to 74. Renaissance in Italy, Paris in the 30s. It was the same kind of feeling. It was a unique moment in time, like this documentary.
And you mentioned that analogy last time, and I really liked it.
Yeah, this is from this documentary. This is the Epics documentary, which I finally found a hard copy of from a few years ago by Laurel Canyon, A Place in Time. Goes through. It's a 2-part documentary. Goes into the first half that we've talked about, and then the second half with Crosby, Stills and Nash, the Eagles, Jackson Browne, who were kind of the second wave of musicians. But the feeling was never the same when you got deeper into the 70s. Too much had changed. Too many national tragedies that occurred. The Vietnam War was still going on. That idealistic kind of facade had fallen apart. And of course, the tendency as we get further away from things is to romanticize it and make it seem like it was more perfect than it was. Was it perfect even at the height of its perfection? No, it wasn't perfect. But it was a unique moment in time. It was a unique decade, 8 to 10 years of really, really creative people with a lot to say, trying to make a dent in the industry and finding a community of like-minded people where they could hang out and make some of the best music of the last, 50, 60, 70 years. It was just one of those places. And you asked last time, could it happen there again? I doubt it, just because so much has changed. It's such a different world now in 2025 versus 1965. How much has changed? It seems unlikely. Will it happen somewhere else again? Maybe, sure. But I think Canyon life, it's just just speaking as one who is not from there, of course, so my authority is limited, but it's just not the same place. Laurel Canyon today, by all accounts, is still a relatively pleasant, safe, bucolic place to live. The main difference now is it's no longer cheap, which it hasn't been for a long, long time. And it's not the epicenter of the music community anymore. It's more very, very wealthy people. But I've known people who have gone there and stayed there, and they say the vibe is still kind of there. If you walk around the canyon, you can still kind of get the feeling of what used to be. I mean, there's still that kind of hippie, relaxed vibe that kind of permeates the canyon. You still smell the lavender and the jasmine and the eucalyptus. So there's echoes of that still left there today, which is important. And one day we'll find out when we finally actually are able to go there.
Yeah.
But that's what people who have been there have told me personally, that yeah, you can still feel it if you pay attention. And a lot of the old houses and stuff are still there. You know, Jim Morrison's house is still there. The Laurel Canyon Country Store is still there. Joni's house is still there. Carole King's house is still there. There's a bunch of them. As much as LA changes and things get torn down and rebuilt and all that stuff, there's a lot of history that is still there. So, yeah, whether it could happen again is anybody's guess, but I would really kind of doubt it, just because 60 years on, it's a very different world.
And also, I think the music industry has changed. So,
oh, sure, no doubt.
I don't think people are, because it was also the vibe. It wasn't just about Laurel Canyon. It was the times, like that people didn't have social media. They didn't have phones. That's why they went off to these really calm, beautiful homes and like Laurel Canyon, so they could write and find inspiration. Like the way people compose and create music today is very different.
Completely. You're right. Yeah.
I highly doubt people aren't using their laptops and the internet to create stuff.
No, for sure. Oh, for sure.
I'm pretty sure people are on YouTube, on looking at music, looking at trends, Googling things, reading articles. Like back then, people didn't have that. They just had to, and I think, and that's why acting has changed as well, because kids today have things to do. They have the internet. They can just sit at their computers. They can go out and socialize. Like back then, like actors would literally like keep to themselves and go home and not see anyone. So whenever they went out in public, whether it was Marlon Brando or whatever, like people would gasp and run after them and scream and whatever. They had to method acting was the only way for them back then, because they had to stay inside and stuff and be alone. And unfortunately that produces a lot of stress on your nervous system as an actor. So at least there are new tools nowadays for musicians and actors to do stuff. But back then there were a few beautiful things. So much like it was for actors and guys like Marlon Brando, I'm pretty sure the same applies to musicians, that because even Terry and Mark Lindsay, when Mark Lindsay was staying at Cielo Drive, he was composing music with Terry. They were playing the piano. They were coming up with sounds. Even in the interview, he mentioned Terry was into certain country rock songs and was like, he was giving him songs in bands and he was like, why don't you create something like that? Like Terry was always like listening to sounds and stuff. And back then, can you imagine how great it was for all these people to compose music and stuff? Because because it's like they had vinyl records, man. They had vinyl records. They weren't just like going on YouTube being like, let me search this song up, let me listen to this, let me Google.
They're still cool.
The lyrics, let me steal the lyrics, let me copy this. Like people were organic. They didn't even have laptops to like record their music. They were playing with instruments on the spot. Like the process was just different. That's why these homes were perfect.
There wasn't studio trickery like auto-tune and melodyne and all that, create false.
And that's what Laurel Canyon needs to be remembered for, like what these homes actually provided to these people.
It was supremely talented people
to compose and create. Yes.
Yeah, it all happened.
So those are my 2 cents.
No, that's true.
Yeah.
That's absolutely true. The people that ran the record companies back then, like the man who ran Atlantic Records, which put these records out, was Ahmet Erdogan. He was a really cool guy. And he was a music guy. He was an executive, but he was a music first kind of guy. So he gave bands a chance that weren't necessarily established. If he liked what they produced and they produced music that was of quality, like, okay, man, we'll sign you. We'll see what you can do. We'll give you 2, 3, 4 records, see what you can do. And he was a big advocate of Crosby, Stills and Nash and Young. These are from Atlantic Records, and they were, as were all their solo records after this, the Stills, Crosby, Nash solo record. Those were all Atlantic. And Atlantic and Warner's, Mo Austin, those were run by music first people. I don't think it's that way anymore. I think it's very much now corporatized, and the emphasis is on the bottom line rather than, okay, you might be unknown, but are you producing good stuff? Could we possibly build a following for your material in the public? Let's give you a shot. Now, again, it drifts over into the film business when we see the endless reboots and remakes and sequels, prequels, superhero stuff, which is fine. Some people like that, but it's now the is geared toward
it's
making the money.
Yeah.
But back then, the music
I
business was
agree.
run by music people, and now I think it's just for better or worse, and in some ways it could be better, but it's now run by corporations with the primary concern being, is this going to make money? Which you can understand on one level or another, but it's unfortunate that the artistic aspect in the front offices has kind of been lost. Like, you don't have people necessarily like Ahmet Ertegun or Mo Austin running record labels who prioritize.
Absolutely, because
music.
now it's just like, I can't think of many singers that have like an incredible singing voice. They've just become very curated.
Well,
like,
there are some, I think,
products.
but it's hard to know how much of it's real because of all the studio tricks you can use and how you can make anything sound like anything if you tinker with it enough.
It's not just that. It's just they've just become very curated figures, but like they're like products that are like shoved in our faces.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Things have changed a lot, I think.
Well, and the dominance of physical copies of stuff is gone.
Yes.
It's dead.
Yeah.
Right? Now, it is kind of coming back with younger people who are finding vinyl cool again and CDs cool again. But it's a small segment of the consumer public. There is an audience for actual physical media, but by and large, people don't own stuff anymore. They don't own movies. They don't own records. They don't own CDs. It's all just it's all part of technology. It's streamed. So there's no real ownership anymore. For better, it's much more convenient that way, sure, but you kind of lose some of the magic when you don't actually own a physical copy of something. And when you talk about records, right? When you talk about records, they're historical artifacts. That's why I like to buy originals. These are all originals. And like I said, I don't buy a lot because they're hard to find in good condition. These are all 1969 records now that I look at it. These are all
But
originals.
Tim, you have to get good vibrations. You have to get Beach Boys good vibrations.
Pet Sounds is hard to find because it's become a cult record and it's widely considered now the Beach Boys' best record. So it's kind of hard to find. Originals cost a lot of money on that one. These sold well. These are not rare, but I like them, so they're important to me because they are history. These have been floating around the sun for 56 years. I think that's kind of cool, and they're still here, and they still sound good. So that's important to me, and it's important to other people too.
It's good, yeah.
It absolutely is. It absolutely is, and we need to keep some of that alive. And I think that will be an emphasis in the series too. Is the music is very important to the series, and the songs we've talked about so far some are famous, most are obscure. The stuff that we want to use, but that's vital to creating the right kind of feeling of the times. And like you said, the place is a character, the characters are characters, but then the music is a character too. And all that plays into the goal of Tina and me is that we don't lose connection entirely to the really good things about that time. And not only that, but also to do right by the people who have been portrayed wrongly in mass media for so long by people
because the longer time passes, the longer we move as far as possible from those times.
Right.
So information actually it gets like we move further away from maybe even the truth.
Exactly. The further
the
we
more
get away
that we move far,
the less we're going to be able to know for sure. So we have a lot of
about
goals
certain events.
We have a lot of goals with this series. Most of the primary one being to do right by the principal characters, Terry, Sharon, and Jay, but also to keep the music and the times and the films and the feeling of that era in LA alive. because as Crosby said, it was a very special time in human existence. And it's better for all of us if we don't completely lose touch with that era. So
It's funny how you mentioned Jay, Terry, and Sharon as the main characters. Like for you, it's 3. For me, it's like at least 7 or 8. It's like Doris Day. It's Doris Day. It's Dennis Wilson, definitely. Greg Jacobson to a lesser extent, but still, Dennis Wilson is definitely one of them. Mark Lindsay is definitely one of them. Candice Bergen is definitely one of them. Who else? Like Bruce Johnston.
Oh, sure. There's a lot of them. If you want to go that deep, sure. Yeah.
Michelle Phillips, John Phillips, Cass out. Like, oh, it's a lot of people. It's a lot of people.
Yeah, that's true.
There's a lot of main characters. Vincent Bugliosi is important as well.
Mm-hmm.
I think
we'll get to all of them in one level or one form or another.
Colonel Paul Tate is one. Sharon's father, who dressed up as a spy and went to bars and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And
that whole,
and maybe even strip
story.
clubs. I can't remember if he went to strip clubs, but like undercover, trying to figure out who the killers were.
Over, as far as
dressed as a hippie.
Yeah, he went all over the Sunset Strip in that scene, dressed as a hippie, trying to infiltrate that world and just find out anything about what happened to his daughter. And yeah, if you look at that, yeah, there's a lot of characters that are important. When I say the 3 main ones, it's like the other ones are kind of branched off from those 3 in some form. But you're right. There's a lot of important people.
Okay, we're reaching an hour 20. I think this is a good time to end.
Okay, good.
So, final words?
Well, no.
I'll just say bye on my end, but yes.
Thanks
say your
as always to everybody who does watch and likes what we're doing. It is appreciated. We will be back probably in 2 weeks because Tina is going to film festivals. So we probably won't record next week, but
I'll be in Cannes next week.
You'll be in Cannes.
And the week after.
Yeah. So
I'll be there the week after, but I'll be back in 2 Sundays from now.
We might have some cool stories to share with that, and that might be some good exposure for the series and what we're doing. So we'll see, but that we won't be around next week to do another episode. Not quite sure what we're going to cover in a couple of weeks, but we'll have to talk about it. Maybe some of those other characters.
I've got lots of things in mind. I like keeping them broad where we can dip in and out of a bunch of different like subjects and stuff. So I think it's good to like talk about different recollections and stuff. But yeah, I like that. I like that a lot. So that's sweet. See, we need Tim to like speak really nice to like the viewers and stuff. I had to make that point earlier because I just found it very funny that like Tim always praises. He's like, we're getting such good comments. Meanwhile, anytime I log on to YouTube, I get notifications and I just see the worst possible stuff ever. I'm like, how is this happening? Is Tim not seeing these comments or is he just choosing to ignore them?
I'm not seeing them all, but the ones I have seen have been by
You're definitely not.
But no, it's again, it's easy to get bogged down in the negative crap from people who just want to criticize, and that's part of putting anything out in the public realm. But I am
sure,
happy there is some interest in the lives of the people we're talking about beyond the stuff that's just been done and done and done and done over and over and over again, and capitalizing on tragedy and exploiting people's deaths. I mean, enough is enough with that. So it's encouraging to see that there's interest not just from us but beyond that aspect of it. So yeah, we'll be back in a couple of weeks to continue this. I'll be very anxious to hear how Cannes goes for Tina and what happened there, but I'm sure that'll be part of it. So until then, as Rock Essentials with Tim says, keep playing it and keep playing it loud. We'll see you next time.
Not this Tim.
Not unfortunately, Tim. No, I can't claim credit for that. That's another YouTube channel.
But you'll take credit for other stuff.
Yes.
Don't demonize, don't deify.
Don't
deify, don't demonize. That's Tim's. That's great. That's great shit. Like
that's what we're doing. We don't want to make anybody look like an angel. We don't want to tear anybody down unnecessarily because they're human beings. You know, there's 2 sides to everybody. It's not just black and white. It's multiple shades of gray. So when we say don't demonize, don't deify, that's what we want to do with the people we're talking about.
Gotta look at it from all sides, man.
Yeah, we gotta
look at it from all sides. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. Great. Perfect.
All right.
Bye, you guys. Bye.
Thanks a lot, everybody.
Wave at them, Tim. Wave. Yes.